Hey guys, Matt Baker from the HMO platform here. Today I'm joined by Daryn Brewer of ProPods, a luxury co-living brand based down in Portsmouth, and we're going to be talking about something which is very close to both of our hearts today, which is all about HMOs and council tax.
Oh, morning.
Morning. So first and foremost, Daryn, tell us a little bit about yourself, your business, and how you got into, I suppose, HMOs in general.
So, ProPods started in 2017, purely off the basis that a client of mine said, "Oh, I'm after a room for an employee of mine. Doesn't want to be in a hotel. Get down in Portsmouth for 3 months. Can you find something? Because I'll have an ensuite." And I was just like, "Yeah, I'm sure we can do that within our lettings business." And 2 weeks later, I still didn't find them what they wanted. And I sort of went home and said to my wife, "Do you know what? Maybe there's a bit of a gap in the market here." And then a couple of property investors said exactly the same to me. You know, we're thinking about creating a top-end HMO, a bit of a niche within a niche. And I think it just evolved from there. But when we first got into it, and my background is 25 years of property. So I recently sold a successful lettings business last September that's 15 years old. So I was always in property. But what I wanted to make sure this time was when we set up a new company, it was all about the brand. Because I thought if we were going to be a niche and be the model for young professionals, we all know young professionals like a brand. You know, let's be honest, 10 years ago, no one walked down the high street with a Starbucks or a Costa cup. It was always, "I've just got a cup of coffee." Now it's very cool to have a Costa or a Starbucks or a Nero. So in the back of my mind, I was like, we have to have the brand first before we develop the product. So it took about 6 months to create ProPods. The name, we had probably about 30 names, and I wasn't happy with any of the names, and it just came to me driving, I think, down the M4 one day of ProPods, and it sort of rolls off the tongue. We now call our tenants ProPodians, as you well know.
Which rolls less off the tongue.
But they love it. The ProPodians love being called ProPodians. And I think it's all part of that brand as well. So that's how we got into it. You know, we delve a lot deeper than probably a lot of HMO co-living providers. Like, our beds are made for us. You know, we source our furniture direct. We have our own main contractors team. So yes, and you know, in the last 3 years, probably just before COVID, we started to evolve onto the high streets, which you and I have had a conversation about. I love the high streets. I'm very passionate about saving our high streets. I think the high street still has a place within the local community.
Definitely.
And it's something that, you know, I really want to push forward, not just with our brand, but, you know, with other people's brands as well. I think co-living, co-working, high streets communities, I think all those can come into one. And also then you bring the environmental bit into it as well, which is less parking, less cars. Can we have electric scooters? You know, something we're looking at is ProPod scooters. You know, so that's really the background of what the business is. But we all know that the dreaded council tax problem.
Well, maybe not everyone knows about.
Well, maybe not everyone knows. Probably you and I know.
We know about it quite in depth. So, you know, if anyone who's just watching the HMO platform YouTube channel for the first time, I have done another video on how the HMO Council Tax issue has affected myself. So there'll be a link for that probably towards the end of this video. But just to kind of sum it up quite succinctly, what is happening out there for HMOs and council tax?
So it seems to be that the Valuation Office Agency, and for people who don't know what the VOA is for short, they are the people who banned every property up and down England and Wales for a council tax banding, and they also have a separate business rates department as well. So it seems to be that the VOA are now wanting to ban bedrooms where tenants have individual tenancy agreements as individual dwellings. Even though they don't pass the self-containment test. And
what is that self-containment test?
So that self-containment test, technically, is eat, wash, live, sleep. Or, in a very simplistic way, does it have a bathroom? Does it have a kitchen? Can you live self-contained in it? And the answer with most HMOs is, no, you can't. And that's why, you know, we have planning for HMOs, whether that be C4, so be generous. We have licensing requirements. Some cities are Article 4, some are not. We have different building reg requirements as well. So it seems to be that part of the government departments know what a HMO is, but the VOA seem to think that this doesn't matter and HMOs can be individual dwellings without having the self-containment part within it.
I think anyone with common sense would agree and say that should not be banded in the same way that a individual flat would be. And just to put it into context, that's exactly what it is. If you've got a 1-bedroom, even a 2-bedroom flat, that can get a band A, and that's exactly what rooms are. What's happening with rooms is they're getting a band A, their own individual band. And who has to pay that?
Well, once it gets individually banned per room, the liability falls onto the tenant. And that's legal. That's a legal piece of legislation. Legally, I can't pay for your council tax in your house, and vice versa. So why then does a tenant have a different legislation? It is what it is. Once it's banded as a dwelling per bedroom, the liability falls onto the tenant. And I can probably imagine most people are shouting at the computer screen or how they're watching this on their device, going, "Oh, that's utter madness. That can't be right. It can't be a self-contained unit. My rooms have just got a bed in it, or they've got an ensuite in it, or whatever." Well, the bottom line is, guys, that's currently what's happening, and this is why, between you and I and many other landlords up and down the country, and plus the HMO and Council Tax Reform group on Facebook, which is all why we are trying to lobby the government to get this out, because we don't think it needs a massive policy change. We just think, as you worded it nicely the other day, the crease needs ironing out within the policy, and I think that's a nice way of actually putting it. There is a crease, and it just needs taking that wrinkle out of it a little bit and ironed out nicely to say, well, a HMO room can't be self-contained because it doesn't pass the self-containment.
Sorry, we're going so well. Just say that last bit again. Where do we get to before I start coughing?
HMO room can't be contained.
Yeah.
So I think what we're all looking to do as part of the HMO reform group, and obviously other landlords up and down the country, is to just iron out that policy, that wrinkle within that policy that says a HMO bedroom can't be banded individually because it doesn't pass the self-containment test.
Yeah, again, that's that common sense.
It's a common sense approach, I think anyone you talk to about this, and believe me, I talk about this on a daily basis. I was even talking about it to someone on the train this morning. Someone said to me, "What are you coming up to Brighton for?" And I was quickly talking to him. And the guy had not even owned a property, never owned a property, never owned an investment property, even actually lived in a rented flat.
Yeah.
And he said to me, "Well, that's utter madness." And I literally spoke to him for 5 minutes. So you think to yourself, well, if someone in the general public outside the property world realises that it's utter madness, how come the government cannot see that this problem is wrong? Or this problem needs resolving?
So similarly, in my musical world, I've got some friends that maybe are not as pro property investors as you and I, and kind of people from a property world. We're friends and we kind of play music together, and I've told them about this type of thing, and even they're going with it. It's stupid. It doesn't make any sense. I can't believe it. Like, their jaws were dropping when I was explaining what was happening and what liability was falling upon tenants, because that's a key thing to remember. Even though we may say we're going to give an all-inclusive bill, which is the whole idea and one of the attractions of kind of the co-living and high-quality HMOs, that you include everything in one bill, it becomes easy for people to move in, and just I say that kind of one bill strategy in a way. But even with that piece of paper in place, the council tax liability still falls onto the tenant. So then we have to decide as landlords whether we're going to reimburse the tenant for that or not, and that's a business decision from our perspective. And to be honest, that is what's happening, and this is why I think we find that not a lot of people know what's happening, because tenants aren't complaining about it, because it's not affecting tenants yet.
No,
because a lot of the landlords are the ones that are subsidising the council tax by reducing rents to take it into account.
Well, I look at it like a scenario of, and we have a lot of landlords who say, we know it's coming, but I don't want to put my head above the parapet, And I said to you the other week, well, the train has left the station, and it really depends on where your HMO is on the track.
Yeah.
Depends on how quickly that train gets to you. So, if the train starts at Land's End and it finishes at John O'Groats, depending on where your HMO is on that track all the way through the country, that's where you're going to be picked up on. So I think you and I know that this problem's only going to get worse. I understand why investors and property landlords and owners don't want to say anything, but the bottom line is it's here. And this policy has been in place since 1992. So for people watching this who can remember the days of Maggie Thatcher and the community charge, or what was known as the poll tax, this feels very much like the poll tax returning via the back door. And for people who don't know what the poll tax was, it was all about how many people lived in a property, not what the property was worth. And obviously in 1991, there was riots throughout the country, mainly London, and the Council Tax 1992 Act was rushed through very quickly because they knew the community charge just wasn't going to work. So what we're seeing is this piece of legislation has been tucked into the Acts, and up until probably 2017, it never really reared its ugly head.
Because as part of the HMO Council Tax Reform Group, which both Dan and myself are committee members, we've got Alan Murdy, who's a barrister, and he's one of the guys that's going to see this happening. And he didn't really start seeing the HMO problem happen until about 2016. And then it started to happen sporadically. And now we're even starting to see more systematic approaches by councils to trying to find out what HMOs or what's happening within an HMO to know whether to reband it.
So I think what's interesting, especially for the viewers, they're probably thinking, well, what happened in 2016, 2017? Well, what happened was there was a case law or a case went to tribunal, went to the High Court, and the decision was made that the listing officer, who there were many within the VOA, the listing officer's discretion on whether they could aggregate or disaggregate a property.
Just to clarify what that means, so if we disaggregate, that's where we're splitting them up into different rooms.
And if we aggregate, we put them all into one.
Yeah.
But the power of that discretion of the listing officer couldn't be questioned, and because that became case law since 2017 or late 2016, 2017, no one's been able to question it since. So you've gone to tribunal, I've gone to tribunal. The valuation tribunal, the people who sit on the panel, cannot question why the listing officer has come to that decision, because if they say, well, can we ask about your discretion, the listing officer says, I'm sorry, legally, you can't challenge me on that. So it seems to be that since 2017 and that ruling, that the VOA and the listing officers have gone, well, do you know what? I don't have to justify my decision. That's what I'm doing. And thank you very much. And that I've questioned that with the powers that be within the VOA, and even they're nervous about questioning the discretion of a listing officer who's employed by them. So there's a two-prong attack where, whilst we understand that piece of case law probably is never going to get changed, this is why we all have to push to have this crease ironed out to stop it.
So I think you're right. That ultimate solution is policy change from central government, which would then override any of that old case law and overrides the kind of those listing officers' discretion. So, and that's essentially what we're pushing for. But before we get on to what we think the solution is, let's maybe touch on some of the issues that are caused as a result of the council tax banding happening. So it's not just the fact that, well, if we look at the obvious one is that the rent will go up eventually. So as more and more HMOs get rebanded for individual rooms, then the market is going to pick up, and eventually tenants will have to pay their own council tax, and they'll get used to that, and therefore rents will go up because landlords will need to put it up to cover costs, cover mortgages, and all of that. So that's number one. The second one is probably around the quality of accommodation. So, what do you think is going to happen around accommodation and quality?
So, I have this concern in my mind that if this keeps happening, and we've got a variety, and I come back to you and I because they're a good case studies. You know, we've got a variety, haven't we? You know, we've got some 5 beds, some 6 beds, some 9 beds, some 12 beds. When it's a 5 bed and it gets rebanded, when you look at what that actually costs compared to the original banding of the house, you think, well, do you know what? That's cost me another £250 a month. It's probably doable. When you get to a 9 bed, I mean, you and I were talking about my 9 bed the other day.
Yeah.
It's gone from 1,800 to 10,800. Well, that's £9,000. That literally is a bedroom and a half for me lost.
Yeah.
So, do I see the level of accommodation dropping in terms of quality? Potentially.
Yeah.
Do I see some landlords thinking, do you know what? I'm just going to create a HMO with no planning, no licensing, no building regs, and take a punt and think, I'll just play devil's advocate, and if someone comes and says, oh, I'm really sorry.
So they're going to fly under the radar and do it all illegally?
Potentially, it could go under the radar and be illegal, which, as we all know, that's not what the government wants. That's why we have Article 4 directive. That's why we have, you know, licensing, you know, selective licensing, additional licensing. I mean, we've got more licensing than pubs. But that's why that's all been created, because, you know, when you and I started out on our co-living HMO journeys, it was all about, can we provide something that's of a very good quality that doesn't exist in the market?
Yeah.
And we're still doing that. But people are going to be thinking, well, actually, I don't want to do that, but, you know, I need to invest in property because that might be my main source of my living or my business. So I do honestly believe we will start seeing little pockets of, actually, I bought a property and no one knows what actually is happening.
There's a key thing there. I think there's a myth that people think that it's just the high quality ones with en suites and maybe kitchenettes that are going to be caught by this, because it's actually we're the ones that are being kind of picked off first, and because they're the ones that the council find out about it, because the council will only know about these things. The council, the VOA, will only know about these things if the council generally refer them. So, and they're referring them when you're converting commercial buildings, because it has to go from business rates to council tax. It's also happening potentially when you go for planning permission. So the council are referring them, and it's also starting to happen now when you apply for a licence
and building regs.
So any of those things where you're talking to the council, they go, "Oh, it's an HMO. Should we or should we not send it to the VOA?" And sometimes they just err on the side of caution, send it to the VOA, and let the VOA make the decision. And that is what's happening more and more. So it's going to happen for developers that are creating HMOs now, which I think is putting a lot of people off developing. So another one of the side effects I think is possibly going to happen is the quality going down, but the underinvestment in the market. So there's going to be no incentive for any landlord to change their HMO, to maybe get more building regs involved by putting en suites in, by extending. There is no incentive to increase the standard and to reinvest into the market.
Well, let's take my business model, because and your business model. You know, I recently said, you know, just on this video that I love the high street. I'm investing in the high street. So I'm doing everything that the government wants me to do as a property owner, developer, landlord. You know, can you regenerate high streets? Yes, I can. Can you reuse buildings? Yes, I can. Can I save my carbon footprint? Well, yes, I can, because I'm reusing that building rather than building new. So a big tick. Can you provide good quality accommodation? Yeah. So I've ticked everything that this government wants me to do, and yet I'm being penalised here. I say the tenant, but it's going to come back on us as well, whether we drop rent or we subsidise the council tax, etc. So we're being penalised because I've done everything right. So why do everything right and be penalised when I honestly believe, and I wouldn't do this, but I think people will go underground or create a very basic HMO, which is, you know what, here's a typical house, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rooms, you can have 1 bathroom, 1 small kitchen, I can just squeeze through on licensing and I've not made any material changes. And I think it's such a shame. I think one department is ruining something that actually could solve part of the housing crisis. Because I know people say, you know, well, a HMO, you know, it causes more people to use the services, it causes more rubbish. I've never disagreed that more rubbish gets created with a HMO. You know, I've always said if a property is banded C or D, I would happily, as a landlord, jump up a band.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the answer. Maybe that's the answer, that a property gets banded as a D. Oh, but you're a HMO, you've got planning, you've got licence, you're a legitimate landlord offering good accommodation. We're just going to jump you up for one band, which is going to cost you an extra £200 a year, but that's just to cover the extra cost of rubbish.
Yeah.
Fair income. But when you look at our 6-bed HMOs, that's no different than a mum and dad with 4 kids.
Yeah.
Putting more pressure on the services of the local authorities, and rightly so, because they've got schooling, they've got hospitals, they've got doctors. They'll probably use those facilities more.
Yeah.
Community centres, etc., etc. Where our professional HMO tenants won't.
No.
They don't need to use a school because they're educated already. They're travelling to the city normally to take a job in the city. So we're creating the local economy. We're actually creating a little bit more of a bubble. More investment into the city from them taking a job in the city and spending their spare cash in the city. And when they're on the high street, they're investing in the high street, aren't they? Because they're spending their spare cash on coffee shops or local gym or or a restaurant or a nightclub or whatever that facilities are in that location.
So I suppose to summarise that, we've got more economically active people in one property that provides more more for that local economy, which is what the local council wants, is money spent in the local economy. And government, again, wants to regenerate the high street through spending in the local economy. So if we can bring people back to the high street, back to communities, then I think that's...
Well, we did an interesting survey the other day. We've got nearly, 80 ProPod rooms. And we think 6 out of 10 Propodians don't drive.
Yeah.
Or if they do drive, they don't bring their car to the city.
Yeah.
They're more than happy, because they're the Generation Z, which is, we're miles in front of them, aren't we? Let's be honest.
Easy.
Steady. But you and I have been very much using a car.
Yeah.
They're very much happy to use public transport. Because buses have Wi-Fi now. If I turn up early at one of our ProPod houses and I sat outside for half an hour pre-lockdown, I'd see him walking out the door at 8:30, earphones on, listening to some music, going down to the local coffee shop, buying a coffee, waiting for the bus, jumping on the bus, doing some work on the bus because they've got Wi-Fi, off they go. Yeah. So actually, again, they're encouraging the use of infrastructure that the local city has put in, where the older generation are like, can't do that. So
families are more likely to have cars.
100%, because they need to go to school and mum and dad's got to go to work, etc., etc. Or I need a car just in case the little one's poorly at school and I've got to get back to school quickly to pick the little one up. Where, because most of our Propodians are aged between 21 and 35 and they're coming to the city for a new job, they're very much more self-dependent. They don't need all those facilities around them, that a typical family does. So I think it's quite interesting how the extra council tax that the government's trying to create on HMOs, actually, our Propodians are not using half those services to justify that cost. Yeah. My 9 beds at the moment, the council won't give me 9 bins. But if that was 9 individual flats, I'd have 9 bins.
Correct. So it's kind of one rule for them and then another for this kind of
and you'll laugh,
this pit in the middle, which is
and you'll laugh, Matt, because when I rung the actual waste department, they went, "I'm really sorry, Darren, you can't have 9 bins. You're HMO."
So it doesn't mean matter.
I'm like, well, I'm not. I know that, but I've got 9 council tax bills. Yeah, but you're HMO. So we've worked out how many bins you need for the amount of people living there. Yeah, but the council tax department say that I'm not a HMO anymore. I'm not individual dwellings. Yeah, well, that's a different department. And it comes back down to, we've got government departments here that accept what HMO is, and a government department that doesn't.
And the councils that are caught in the middle. And to be fair to them, don't really know how to deal with it. They're all making it. They're making it up. Different councils are doing different things, and and be devil's advocate. They're between a rock and a hard place.
Of course they are.
So coming back to that ultimate solution of the law needs to change.
Yes.
So how can we solve the problem? Well, there are many ways, but what do you think?
There's many ways. You and I have had many a conversation.
Yeah.
Originally I started off by saying, well, the definition of the self-containment needs to be more defined.
Yeah.
I basically started off that a dwelling cannot be a dwelling unless it passes the self-containment test, and obviously people have heard what that self-containment test is.
Again, that's common sense.
That's common sense. But then we went into it a little bit more, and then I started to think, actually, it's not the definition of a dwelling needs changing. It just needs to be that a HMO bedroom cannot be classed as a dwelling unless it passes the self-containment test. And I think that's a far more simpler piece of wording to add to the policy rather than redefining what a dwelling is. Because I think the redefining of a dwelling could be construed as a very confusing part of legislation. And what we don't want to happen is for this to drag on for years and years and years, and for it to go to Parliament and to be heard, and to, consultation, and to have the first reading in Parliament and the second reading, and maybe the Lords have to get involved in it. Where what we'd really like to do is the Secretary of State for Housing, who is currently Michael Gove, to sit down with us and go, and his team, and go, okay, we can see what you're saying. Oh, actually, we can just add this bit in here.
Yeah. That's
done. We actually think it's a 5-minute piece of writing that could just be snipped into the paragraph of the definition of a HMO, and that could be it. I mean, let's be honest, they change the right to rent guides every 6 months.
Yeah. And
no one queries that. Every time that right to rent guide gets changed slightly every 6 months, or I've just seen one that's recently come out, I think the last week, so that's no different to the policy of the HMO definition to what a right to rent guide is,
I think there's room in legislation to change without a massive overhaul, as you say. And I think that the knock-on impact of that is then you can go to the VOA and say, here's your clarity. You go to the council and say, here's your clarity. You can't do this unless it meets that self-containment test. So I think we have to note that there are still going to be some HMO rooms which might get rebanded
completely,
when they have washing facilities and cooking facilities in the room. But I know from research that we've done in the shared living survey, and from what you've done, is that most tenants don't actually want cooking facilities in the room. They much prefer to have a better all single dancing kitchen with options.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting, isn't it? Pre-COVID, did we create bedrooms with en suites that were COVID compliant before COVID even existed? Because I remember when we went into first lockdown, and where we're based in Portsmouth, we've got a super hospital there. And the year before COVID, we had a lot of junior doctors saying, we really like your rooms, but they're a little bit more than what we can afford. As soon as lockdown happened and COVID happened, I've never seen an influx of junior doctors and consultants who are having to go to the super hospitals because of COVID, sadly, obviously what was happening. And they were like, this is great. We can come straight in, get straight in, changed, cleaned up, and we've got somewhere really nice to live. They don't want kitchens.
No.
They don't want kitchens. And I think, it's like anything, innit? When you have a party, the kitchen's the hub.
Yeah.
Wherever you have a house party and people come around, everyone always congregates in the kitchen. You could have the biggest garden and the biggest lounge ever. I guarantee 90% of your people from your party,
they end up in the kitchen.
They're in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So we took that logic, and that's why when we create a ProPod house, we're normally 20 to 30% bigger on the communal areas than what the licensing requires, because we want our ProPodians to have that real community feel whilst they're cooking. They normally see each other probably between 5 and 7 or 8 o'clock of an evening, and most of it is congregated into the kitchen dining.
Whilst they're cooking, they're chatting
to each other, So, we know for a fact that I would say 90% of our Propodians wouldn't want kitchens in their rooms. So we know, like your survey said, that most HMOs are either no en suites or en suites. It's very rarely that you get a HMO bedroom with a kitchen and a shared bathroom moving forward. We know they exist. Yeah. But again, if it has a kitchen but no bathroom, then technically it doesn't pass the self-containment test. So I think you're right. Unless it's got all those facilities in a bedroom, then it shouldn't be individually banded.
Yeah. So one of the other issues that we've seen in your conversations with the VOA is that the VOA actually think that they're helping landlords by rebanding rooms. And I think this has come from landlords that are based in London mainly.
Yeah, so I was on a call the other week with Alan Murdy and the VOA, and for people that don't know, there's something called a CLU, which is a certificate lawful use. So if you have a property that may not have had planning and it's being created and it's being rented out for a period of time, and you can prove it with tenancies and council tax bills, you can actually apply for a CLU of your local authority. And it's more of a legal document than a planning document, but it sort of says that no enforcement can be given if the council agree that it's being used as a dwelling for a period of years. So I brought this up with the VOA and said, well, what you're doing with bedrooms is, in 4 years' time, people are going to be using the council tax bills and the tenancy agreements to apply for a CLU for a bedroom, which thus means you're creating dwellings that could only be maybe 10 square metres. And the VOA came back and said, well, actually, we get quite a few people asking us to split rooms or flats into two dwellings by rooms. And I was like, well, I'm sure you do. And they're like, well, what do you mean? And then when I explained to them what a CLU was, which they'd never heard of before, you could see that the penny sort of drops, and it was like, oh, well, we thought we were doing it to help out the landlord. Well, you are. Yeah, well, you definitely are. So from that conversation, I then started doing a bit of digging, and I sent you a link, didn't I? Of was it the other way around? I can't remember. I can't. Either way,
you found one and I found one.
That was right. Yeah. So I found a 7.5 square metre flat. That was a HMO.
Yeah.
That had a CLU, and we obviously went through the history, didn't we? And went through the planning history, found the CLU, and it sold at auction in February for £75,000. And it was quite a clever design. I mean, I'm not quite sure you and I would agree that that's how a bedroom should look. Well, actually, it wasn't a bedroom because it was a flat. And it had a raised bed with a sink. No, it was a sink, was it? It was a fridge and a microwave above it. And the only way you could have a shower with the ensuite was a bifold door, and you had to sit on the toilet and let the shower water fall on you, basically. And that just shows where departments just don't talk, because we know for a fact that when the former Secretary of State Robert Jenrick was Secretary of State for Housing and Levelling Up, he stopped permitted development in office blocks of the creation of dwellings unless it met the minimum space standards of a flat, which was 37 square metres. Well, we've now found a loophole. So, you could have an office building anywhere in the country, and then you could think, well, do you know what? I could create maybe 40 flats, but I've got a parking issue. Or I could create an 80-bed super, what they call it now, a megamo.
Megamo.
A megamo, someone told me the other day. And have it all individually rebanded. I could actually, as a landlord, go to the VOA and say, I want you to reband all my rooms. And 4 years later, that developer could then apply for 80 CLUs, and all of a sudden he's got 80 dwellings within an office block, which could be sold off individually, that haven't met the national space standards, haven't met parking requirements, and let's be honest, that's a way of creating tomorrow's slums for today. We don't want these tower blocks anymore. We don't want people crammed into really tight spaces. That's what the Housing Act 2004 was created for, or superseded. That's what it was there for. You and I agree that space standards should be good and better, and tenants and property owners should have more space within their dwellings. Well, we've now found the loophole. So whilst Robert Jenrick tried to stop that loophole, well, we've sort of found it via the back door.
And there was another one as well, which was in the Metro, which I sent to you.
Oh, that was right. Well, you were on the train, wasn't it?
I was on the train, I was reading the Metro, and this flat again, which was about 10 square metres, was being sold off for £175,000 in Knightsbridge, and it had no toilet. So it was a development opportunity. To sell it. So insane that this is actually happening right now, but it is happening now. So you can use this loophole which has come across since 2017 to create substandard dwellings and then sell them off. So in London they have quite a lot of value as individual units, but in the majority of the country, which is where the rest of us invest, it doesn't work, and actually it's causing more of a problem, because what we want to do is buy and hold properties for the long term and create spaces where people want to stay for a long period of time. And that's one thing that both of us have done with our respective properties, is turn them into properties where people are staying for short periods of time.
Yes.
So what happened to mine is I converted mine into service accommodation. So now not housing people, it's now more of a holiday let. So it's not helping the housing crisis.
Yep.
And similarly for yours.
Yeah, I mean, I have one ProPod property that we sort of use for short-term people, short-term contractors.
Yeah.
You know, people maybe who are job sharing or maybe having to move 100 miles or more for their job just for a 3-month period. And it comes back to, why did I originally start ProPods? Well, because someone contacted me because one of their employees didn't want to get hotel fever for 3 months. Mm-hmm. And we've especially noticed it over COVID or over lockdown and through COVID and I'd say post-COVID. Mm-hmm. Everyone knows what I mean. We're getting out the other side now, but I'm seeing it more and more. You know, our property manager gets a call probably 3 or 4 times a week. Oh, hi, have you got a room? I'm only looking to stay in the city for 8 to 10 weeks.
Yeah.
Well, that's still a HMO.
Yeah.
But yeah, we are seeing how the market is evolving. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you know, I think the whole thing is crazy, Matt, to be honest with you, and I'm sure everyone listening to this now, like I said, is probably shouting at their computer screens, going, "This is just madness," you know.
Yeah.
And believe me, if people watching this are thinking, "Oh my God, this is a load of information," Matt can tell you that my head is full of all this. And the other week, it brings us on quite nicely.
Yeah, the other week we put together the kind of HMO Council Tax Reform Group white paper, first draft that we're just editing at the moment, and that will be out very shortly. And when it is, we will pop a link to it down below in the comments section, the information area of this video, so you can go and get a copy of that. And that's from kind of HMOs and counciltax.co.uk as a website. But as a group, the HMO Council Tax Reform Group is, as I said, yourself, me, Wendy Whisker-Large, Alan Murdy, and a couple of other
committee members,
investors who are kind of helping behind the scenes. And we just need to kind of get the word out there and get more people aware of the issue.
Yeah, and the idea of the white paper was, it all started because Matt said to me a few weeks ago, "There's so much in your head, Darren. We need to get this down on paper." And actually, it was bogging me down. You know, when Matt finally sat me in front of the laptop and I just spilled all this stuff out. One, I think it surprised you how much of a knock on this one issue can have to the rest of the market.
We've not even covered all of them today.
And we've not covered all of them. No, we haven't. And secondly, I think it's something that the group needed, because if we are going to lobby the government, they need to see in black and white, quite clear, you know, what is the problem and what is the solution. Because one thing I've learned is you can't have a problem unless you have a solution, because other people will say, well, what do you want, how do you want us to deal with it? Well, this is how we want you to deal with it, and here is a solution to this problem. So I think that's quite a valuable piece of work that we've created there as a group. And I think that document will reinforce what we are trying to achieve. And I think the more people who come on board to the group, you know, we've got to do some crowdfunding, as we know. We haven't mentioned that today. We have got to start doing some crowdfunding because we are going to start, you know, having costs come in pretty soon with this, especially with PR and media, etc., etc. But I think that document there is the start of hopefully that is the end. That is the solution. We hope.
Yeah. So I think just a key to kind of summarise what you're saying there. If someone wants to find out more, get involved with the HMO Council Tax Reform Group, then head over to HMOs and counciltax.co.uk. You can register there to find out more information. If you've been affected by it, we want to hear from you as well, because we are looking for case studies from landlords and particularly from tenants. So if you've had a tenant that's been affected by this, or if you're watching this because you are a tenant that's been affected by this, please do get in touch right in the comments below. So we want to hear from you, because we've been talking quite a lot about this from the landlord's perspective, but I think the key point that we've made in the white paper, and we're refining at the moment, is that actually the people that are going to be affected by this long term are the tenants. So it's exacerbating the cost of living crisis and driving down living standards.
Yeah, and I think you commented on it earlier about it's not just it affects the top end of the market. You know, it affects every level of the market. I mentioned the other day, and this really concerns me, that if you've got someone who is working 16 hours a week but claiming universal tax credits on their room,
Yeah.
they potentially will not get a 100% discount on their council tax because they're working 16 hours a week. They might get a 70% discount, say, as an example.
Mhm.
So their council tax bill might be £30 a month. Well, to some people that might not be a lot of money, but to someone who's working 16 hours a week and claiming universal tax credits,
Mhm.
that may be the difference of them actually putting food in there,
Yeah.
in
On
their
the table,
fridge,
yeah.
on the table for that week. So where do I see a problem there? Well, I see the problem of, could they then apply for a discretionary payment from the local authority, which will come out of a government pot,
Mhm.
to pay for the council tax on their room that shouldn't have existed in the first place? So you're right, this isn't affecting the top end of the market, this affects every level of the market.
Yeah.
And regionally, it's a big problem. You know, you and I know our rooms here on the south coast are on average probably £650, maybe £700.
Yeah.
But you go up north, the rooms may be £450 a month.
Mhm.
Now, if their council tax band A is the same as what we are here,
Similar, yeah.
yeah, our room, the percentage could be 12-15% of the rent here,
Yeah.
but it could be 25%
Yeah.
up north. So
I can actually give you an example on that.
Well, there you
so the one which got rebanded, the rent is £450 for each of the rooms, and the council tax, which they then had to pay, was just under £100.
So there you go.
So it was up from £450 to essentially £550.
So
But we had to reduce.
So they've got a 20, off the top of my head, nearly a 22% increase.
Yeah.
From their room rate to cover the extra council tax.
Pretty much.
Well, how is that levelling up?
It's not.
You know, we talk about the levelling up. We talk about that the department's been renamed as levelling up team. There is no levelling up there, and
No.
I think with cost of living as it is,
Yeah.
you know, we know that as landlords, we're seeing cost of electricity and gas rise on our
Yeah.
HMOs, but we also know that some of the older types of HMOs have still got meters in them.
Yeah.
Well, then the tenants are having to pay for their electric, and now they've got this extra bill
Yeah.
on top. So it needs to have a proper conversation, and I think we're getting to the stage where we would like more people to be involved in lobbying their MPs.
Yeah.
You know, we've got a list of MPs that have already been lobbied, as in letters sent. I think that's only up to about 30. I mean, I think there must be 300 MPs in the UK.
Yeah, and in actual fact, we'll pop a link to
Yes.
a letter template down in the comments down below as well. So please do use that and send a letter to your MP. When you've done it, let us know, and we can add that to our list.
But I think the most important thing is, in my history of property developing over the last 25 years as a landlord or developer, I've never seen anything that's brought the tenant and the landlord together.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of the first times I think landlord and tenant need to work together to iron out this crease.
Mhm.
You know, we saw the tax implications in section 24.
Yes.
Section 24, that was all about the landlord.
Yeah.
You know, and it was the government ignored it because it was all about the landlord. Well,
Yeah.
now this is about the landlord and the tenant, and for once, the landlord is trying to protect
The tenant.
on cost.
I think there's a discernible difference because we know that the kind of section 24 it was going to increase rents long term,
Yes.
but there was no immediate impact. With this, there's an immediate impact.
Yes.
You get rebanded, the tenant has an immediate bill,
And they backdate.
and they backdate. So, in fact, you've got an example whereby you've got tenants that have been in properties, and
Yep.
because you've been fighting and arguing to get it sorted, those tenants they then moved out, they've gone somewhere else,
Yes.
and then they have a liability in their name,
Yep.
and then the council are going after them
Yeah.
and giving them court summons.
Yeah. And the tenant doesn't know about
The
it.
tenant doesn't know about it.
So again, it comes back to, how does the local authority deal with the problem that the government department is causing,
Creating, yeah.
is creating? You know, and we talk about government departments, but I've had a conversation with HMRC. They're doing a consultation paper at the moment on multiple dwelling relief.
Mhm.
Well, if these bedrooms get classed as individual dwellings, and a landlord then goes and buys a HMO with 8 lots of council taxes,
Yep.
you could argue that he's buying 8 individual dwellings, which means he could apply for multiple dwelling relief on stamp duty.
Yep.
When you talk to HMRC, they go, no, we're really sorry, it doesn't apply to HMOs, because HMO's one dwelling.
Well, is it?
Is it?
And that's,
Is it?
And that's what needs clarifying.
And that's what needs clarifying. So it's amazing what one piece of paper called a council tax bill,
Yeah.
what knock-on effect it can have throughout the whole industry and government legislation.
Yeah.
And this is why we've got to iron out this crease with one department, because the knock-on effect, the ripple effect, is huge.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for
That's right.
being with us
I hope that
today.
made some sense. I'm even more confused.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as I say, if people want more information, then there'll be a whole bunch of links down below. Otherwise, thank you very much for being with us,
Thank
Daryn.
you guys.
And I'll see you in the next video.